It's nice to be back in Kettering. I must say that last time I was here, it was slightly more full. That's for sure. I think we came with a special program for Adventist World Radio at that time. We're doing most of a day session with a team that came up from Newbold. I was in meetings last week in Oslo, in Norway. These were ADRA meetings where we were meeting with the donor offices, the offices that raise funds for ADRA, and the region directors for ADRA. And one of the key things that we were discussing was, of course, how we are going to continue to meet the immense crisis that's still ongoing, that's affecting Europe, that's affecting the Middle East at large. And if you look at the news these days, you know that this story is almost never ending. Maybe yesterday they have another agreement in place where they will do a 1-for-1. When a refugee lands in Greece, they will be sent back to Turkey, and then one from Turkey can come to Europe. And it all is so mysterious how we are dealing with this crisis. What would you do? What would you do if you and your children faced enduring danger, hunger, or had to live in desperate circumstances? What would you do? What would you do to secure education and a better future for your children? I've been reading recently through Richard Flanagan's recent novel, The Narrow Road to the Deep North. And in it, he tells some really dramatic stories of the plight of the Syrian refugees as they live in Lebanon or have escaped to Greece or have gone to Serbia. More than 5 million Syrians have left that country trying to escape death. And if you had to choose between life or death, you would choose life. And so have they. And so ADRA has been working in the Balkan routes in particular during the last 6-7 months. As the refugees landed in Macedonia, then moved into Serbia, into Croatia, into Austria, ADRA tried to be of assistance along that route. And one of the stories that I heard just recently is of Abdullah, who with his family crossed into Serbia, hoping that he would flee the violence that he experienced in Iraq forever. When he talked to our staff, he said there is no hope in Iraq anymore. And so he decided to leave with his family of 5, fleeing the violence in that country. And even though we see on the media these large groups of migrants, we see the huge crowds, we as ADRA know that behind every face, there is an individual story that really affects us when we speak and listen to their treacherous journeys. Abdullah and his family thought that once they had escaped the Middle East and had landed in Greece and made their way to Bulgaria, that they would be safe, that they at least would have left the violence behind them. But in Bulgaria, they were attacked and brutalized by who they thought were Bulgarian police, but most likely members of the local organized crime. And criminals all across Europe attack on a regular basis the vulnerable refugees as they make their way north in an attempt to extort money from them. Abdullah's daughter had a very poorly hand. It was injured during her travels. And the ADRA team took her to the local hospital to give her some care and attention. And the hospital offered even to do an operation on her, but her father said, no, we have to go on our way to Germany. And so they left. They wanted to move as quickly as possible north before the door of redemption would shut. Now, as you know, that door of redemption, if I can call it that, has shut. And the border into Macedonia, into Serbia, into Croatia, those borders are closed. And right now we're facing an immense crisis in Greece because more and more refugees are landing in Greece with nowhere to go. And with ADRA we're looking at working in 4 or 5 of the camps that are now established in Greece in order to help and to meet the people where they are, hoping to give them at least some food, some healthcare, and maybe even education. But this migrant crisis that we are facing in Europe is on an incredible scale. And it's placing the European Union at a political and humanitarian crossroad as never, ever before. At no time in the world's history have so many people been affected by conflict. And the UN puts the figure these days at 60 million people that are conflict-affected, displaced people. 60 million. That's the size of the UK population. People fleeing war, conflict and economic disaster, or even the effects of climate change. And if you say it quickly, 60 million, it's not that much. But when you think about it, that these are people that have left their home, their land, their family, their friends, and are somewhere stuck in the middle. And we know that while in 2015 1.2 million refugees settled in Europe, if nothing is done, it will probably go up to at least 1.6 or 1.8 million this year. But as this story is evolving, as we see changes being made by the politicians, we as ADRA need to lay our ear very close to the ground in order to know how we can play a role. We believe as ADRA that we also need to make sure that not only do we help refugees as they are landing in Europe and making their way across Europe, but we also want to make sure that we help the Syrians where they are. And we've submitted 2 weeks ago a proposal to the DFID, the Department for International Development, together with MEDAIR and Action Against Hunger, ACF, for a £33 million project inside Syria. And the ADRA share will be about between 11 and 12 million pounds over the next 3 years. That's money that we will spend on actually rebuilding shelter, providing education, providing food to migrants in the country of Syria, internally displaced people in Syria. And we're very hopeful and trusting that we will have this project proposal agreed by DFID. Because ADRA is already working on the ground in Syria. And the stories we get out of Syria of what they are doing are incredible. And ADRA is one of the few charities that is actually working right on the cutting edge inside Syria. In the government-controlled areas, we are not extending it outside of the government-controlled areas for some very political reasons. But we are there. And I want you to remember that, especially as Annual Appeal starts next week, one of the key focus points for us is conflict-affected people. We want to make sure that we help people that are facing conflict no matter where they are. We cannot forget stories like that of Abdullah, of a father who is dedicated to provide for his children a better future and is seeking a way out of this problem that he and his family faced. Let me tell you this, refugees are not like you and me. They are you and me. They are people that need help now. And there's no time in the future in which they might be helped. The only time we have is now. If we don't help now, we will have lost an opportunity to care for people that live in need forever. But when we tell these stories and when we see what's happening, and when we see on the news how all of this is happening, we cannot help but give thanks to God that we have a God that provides for us. We give God thanks for the food and drink, for our income through work or benefits that He provides for us. We give thanks to God that we have no hunger or thirst. But then in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says here in the Beatitudes in verse 6 that you are blessed if you are hungry and thirsty for righteousness, grateful for no hunger, but hungry for righteousness. So how does that work? What does that mean for us? Well, you've seen it from the title of my sermon, to be thankful for a full stomach, but with hunger in your soul. Now, this sermon is all about the kingdom of heaven. And throughout this sermon, Jesus deals with this question, how do you get there? Who is this kingdom of Jesus intended for? What people are fit to be part of that kingdom of heaven? Now, even non-Christians have heard of the Sermon on the Mount. It's famous. Christians have heard many sermons on the Sermon on the Mount, but still find parts of it hard to understand and hard to apply to our lives. And John Stott put it this way. He said, the Sermon on the Mount is probably the best known part of the teaching of Jesus, though arguably it is the least understood, and certainly it's the least obeyed. And so here in verse 6, we find one of the most prominent characteristics is for us to have a hunger and thirst for righteousness. Those who ache and yearn for justice, the Greek word for justice also means, righteousness also means justice, will receive what they seek. Those who suffer from evil will want things to be set right, will be rewarded. So it's talking about hunger and thirst. Now we all are aware with those feelings, aren't we? It's a feeling that you need something. It's not something you think about. You don't think, what's this feeling? Oh, it's hunger. Or you go like, what is this feeling? Oh, I know, it's thirst. No, you know. It doesn't need long consideration. Now, I have to ground you that this morning's breakfast is probably already pretty much a forgotten event. And maybe your tummy is already rumbling and you think, preacher, hurry up, I'm hungry. And you may have a vision of what lunch will look like. It's a strong feeling. You miss something. You need something. And you will do something about it. If you're hungry, you will do something about it. You will make sure that you satisfy your hunger and thirst. And it's this image of craving that Jesus applies to us, to you and me, seeking to make a difference in the world today. To help those that are living in injustice, in poverty, in distress. To help the migrants as they're trying to find a new life. Now, thanking God for what you have in the kingdom of Jesus is not complete until you feel what is missing. And so we can give thanks for a full stomach, but with hunger in our soul, a hunger for justice. Let me explain. Almost half of the world, over 3 billion people live on less than £2 a day. And tonight, more than 800 million people will go to bed hungry simply because they have had no food to eat. And according to UNICEF, 22,000 children die each and every day due to poverty. And you don't see it on the newspaper, you don't hear it in the news, because they die quietly in some of the poorest villages on earth, far removed from the scrutiny and the conscience of the world. 22,000 children die every day. Did you know that we throw away more food in Europe every year than is produced in all of Africa? Let me say that again. We throw away more food in Europe than is produced in all of Africa in a year. Do you know that we spend in the UK £356 million per year on bird feed? And all the money we spent in the Western world on bottled water in 1 year could eradicate thirst around the world in one sweep. All the money spent on bottled water in 1 year could eradicate thirst around the world forever. You have to agree with me, there's so much skewed in this world today. That's not right. Is that righteousness? Do you feel now that hunger and thirst for justice? Righteousness means treating people like you will treat your God. Righteousness means treating migrants like you will treat your God. Now, we often describe our faith in terms of how we relate to God, and to a certain degree how we relate to people around us. We know it's not perfect, and that's why we ask for forgiveness, and that's what grace is all about, to make things better again. But sin is not just something where you go wrong directly with God or your family or your brothers and sisters in church. Sin also relates to society. Sin is injustice. Sin is the imbalance between the poor and rich. And God sees that. And He says to you and me, that is injustice. It is not just that 20% of the population of the world uses 80% of the world's energy. It's not just that people in Africa suffer diseases that could be cured with cheap medication. That is injustice, unrighteousness. It's sin. And God sees that. And He wants us, as citizens of the kingdom of heaven, to see that too. He wants you and me to look at our world today and feel that hunger, feel that thirst for righteousness, for justice. So when are you happy? Just ponder. When are you happy? If you feel good, if you have enough to eat and drink, if you're healthy, if your children do well in school, if you enjoy your grandchildren, if you have enough income, and so on. We feel happy because we have plenty, because we feel good. And you know what? If we don't feel good, just switch on the television. And the commercials will be telling us how they can make that good feeling even better. If you would buy this new iPad Pro, your life would be fantastic. You should get it. Oh, this new Volvo. You really need to get this new Volvo, because if you have this new Volvo, your life will be so much better. And if you can't pay for it, don't worry. This loan will let you buy whatever you want today. You know what? The sad thing is we as Christians, we go along wanting to feel better and better. But Jesus says that we are not happy if we have the good feeling that we have enough. Jesus says to be truly happy And to follow in my kingdom, you should feel miserable. You must be hungry. You must have a hunger for justice. You must be thirsty. You must have a thirst for righteousness. To be well off in a world of poverty, that is injustice. A cry to the heavens. And God sees that. He sees that injustice in the world. He sees the suffering of the Syrians, of the Iraqis, the Afghani. He sees the suffering of the Eritreans. He sees the suffering of the Sudanese, the Somalians. And the list can go on and on and on. But he wants the people of his kingdom to see that too. You, me, us. And he wants us then to also say, this is not acceptable. This can't. This won't do. You have to feel it like a hunger and thirst. The longing for a better world. The longing for righteousness. That is the hunger we need to feel today. You met Nomfundo in the little clip. And I met her during a trip to a visit to Swaziland in November. And she's a delightful girl, so positive and a real joy. We went to the school and said we would like to have one of the girls show us where she lives, so that we can, tell people in England what life is like here. And they said, oh yeah, she's our star student, and she wants to become a doctor. And she sleeps, and you saw where she sleeps. You see where she gets the water. You see the embarrassment in her eyes when I asked her where the toilet was. Just next door to her, there was another woman I met. And she lived on her own. Her husband had passed away and left her with HIV/AIDS. That was diminishing her strengths continuously. Now, we helped quite a number of people in that community thanks to the annual appeal of last year. We helped 250 households that were suffering from HIV/AIDS. And she was one of the beneficiaries. And one of the things that we did is we gave them a water tank to capture at least some rainwater and help to build a market garden, a small kitchen garden. And so this lady was also given a kitchen garden, a fence, and, around a small plot of land. And I asked her to show me what was happening there. And she was very embarrassed. Now, how many of you have green fingers? Any one of you have an allotment where you grow food and vegetables? So you must be pretty good at growing greens and spuds maybe and vegetables. This poor lady had no clue about growing food or vegetables. Some people have green fingers and some don't. And just because we train people, in Africa to grow food doesn't mean that they can do it. You have to have a gift too. And she showed me her little plot of land and the limp plants and things that were not growing. And I asked her how she was able to survive. And she started sobbing in despair. It was a tough moment. We want to do our best, we want to help. We can be thankful for where we live, for our food and drink, for our wealth. But when we do, we have to realize that more than 1 billion people live in crippling poverty in the world today. That millions of migrants are escaping more cruelty than the world has ever seen before. And we are thankful for what we have. But we do so in a world lacking clean water, lacking medical care, that's rampant with child labor and modern slavery. We're thankful for what we have. But we also know that the injustice that the many multinationals inflict upon people around the world is just shocking. Or to bring it closer to home, we are thankful today But know that here in Kettering, there are probably people that need support from a food bank to provide for their daily needs. We look at the shambles of the refugee camps in Calais and Dunkirk, but forget about the tent camps in our inner cities like Manchester, the down and outs right here in our own community. So how do we deal with that? And that is a frightfully difficult question. I see so much injustice when I travel. I hear of so many problems in the world through my work with ADRA, of the needs that are out there. And sometimes I just sigh. I just shake my head in disbelief because there is so much wrong in this world. So what can we do about it? What can we, you and I, us, what can we do about it? And perhaps you had expected me to answer this question. Perhaps you thought that I would say that ADRA is the answer to all the problems we see and hear in the world today. But it isn't. And perhaps you think that the church is the answer to end all the problems. But I'm not sure it can. And to me, this sermon really has an open ending, a challenge for you. I don't have the answers. But I do believe, however, that there are possibilities. We can change things in people's lives today, both far away, overseas, but also near in our community. Think about that. Accept that feeling of hunger and thirst and crave for righteousness in the world today. Just before I came up here, I had a picture message from one of my team members that is in North Wembley today. And she said that the agent in North Wembley put up a PowerPoint presentation to introduce the annual appeal. And one of the slides that really captured her imagination, and she sent to me, was this: poverty is never on a break. Poverty is never on a break. Now is the time to help people. And if we feel that craving, if we feel that hunger and thirst for righteousness, we will continue to find ways in which we can help people escape from living in poverty. Find ways to make living better here today while we wait for tomorrow to come. And so my wish for you today is to feel spiritually hungry and thirsty and help change lives. And I truly hope that with our stomachs full, we will have plenty of hunger. It's my prayer this morning.